All right, so you want to know about the first communion? Huh. Well, this is going to be fun. We're diving deep into early Christian practices,
Yeah.
specifically, how and when they celebrated the Last Supper. And our guide for this is an
Oh,
article from the Biblical Archaeology Society website. So
okay.
get ready because you never know what twists and turns we're going to find.
It's true. The First Communion wasn't like a single event or anything, but
Oh,
more of a constantly evolving practice.
yeah.
It reflected how early Christians understood their faith and their community.
So we're not talking about like a set ritual right off the bat.
No, not at all. It all comes from that moment. We all know the Last Supper, described in the Gospels. We're talking Passover meal, where Jesus shares bread and wine with his disciples.
Of course.
He says those famous words, "Do this in remembrance of me." But the sources seem to say doing this wasn't like a quick ritual.
So what was it like then for those first few centuries?
Okay, so picture this full-blown meals. We're talking
Yeah.
early Christians getting together in homes, sharing food, wine stories, and memories of Jesus, much less structured than what we see today.
So communion, like a vibrant dinner party,
Yeah.
I bet things could get pretty lively.
Well, like any dinner party, things didn't always go smoothly.
Uh-oh.
The article mentions Paul in his letters. He was trying to deal with some issues that were cropping up.
Okay, let's hear it. What kind of dinner party drama was Paul dealing with?
Well, it seems like there were disagreements about the food.
Oh, no.
Maybe a little too much enthusiasm for the wine.
I can imagine that.
Classic dinner party problems, but happening within this sacred meal.
So a little too much spirit at these gatherings. I guess some things never change, but I'm sure these issues played a role in how communion evolved.
Oh, absolutely. Along with other factors. By the 3rd century, things are different. Communion is more structured,
Okay.
less of a full meal and more of a symbolic ritual.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. What caused this shift? Was it just practical, or was there something deeper?
Probably a combination. The article points to a few key reasons. One is the time of day Christians began to gather.
Interesting.
At first it was evenings, but later they started meeting in the mornings.
I can see how that would change things.
Right.
Hard to have a big festive meal first thing in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another factor was just the growth of the Christian community.
Ah.
As more people joined, meeting in homes became less practical. They needed larger spaces,
Of course.
often dedicated buildings, and this led to more organization and structure.
So it's like those early Christian communities outgrew their potluck phase. They needed something that could grow with them.
Yeah, like a small startup becoming a huge corporation.
I like that analogy. As the community grew, they needed a unified practice, a common ritual everyone could share.
Absolutely.
This transition from casual meal to a more formal ritual is fascinating.
Yeah,
The article points out this wasn't just about logistics or crowd control.
right.
It reflects a deeper shift in how early Christians understood and practiced their faith.
For sure, if we look at the bigger picture, as Christianity spread and evolved, there was a growing emphasis on the theological significance of communion.
Interesting.
The bread and wine became less about a shared meal and more about symbolizing Jesus' sacrifice and presence.
So the focus shifted from the communal aspect of the meal to the symbolic meaning of the bread and wine.
Exactly. It became less about feasting with fellow believers and more about connecting with Jesus on a spiritual level.
That's a profound shift. It makes you wonder, how did those early Christians experience this change? Was it welcomed, or was there resistance to letting go of that original, more informal way of commemorating the Last Supper?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of firsthand accounts to paint us the full picture, but what we do know is by the 3rd century, this more ritualized form of communion was becoming the norm.
It really highlights how faith and practice are always evolving. They adapt to the changing needs and understandings of a community, and that evolution continues today. Think about all the different ways various Christian denominations practice communion.
Absolutely. It's not static at all. It's constantly being reinterpreted and reshaped even within the same denomination. There could be variations. Some churches have communion every week, others less frequently. Some use wafers, others use loaves of bread.
And some share a common cup, others use individual cups. It's fascinating how this one practice can be adapted and interpreted in so many different ways. It makes you wonder if there's even a single right way to do communion.
That's a great point. Perhaps what really matters is the meaning and the intention behind it.
Yeah.
The remembrance of Jesus and his sacrifice.
And the impact it has on individuals and communities. This deep dive is making me think about communion in a whole new light. It's not just a ritual I perform in church. It's part of a long, evolving tradition stretching back to those earliest gatherings of Jesus's followers.
It is incredible to think about how something as fundamental as communion went through such a dramatic evolution, and that evolution continues even today.
Speaking of understanding, there's something I've been wondering about. We've talked about the how W of communion, but what about the WHY? Why was this specific act, sharing bread and wine, chosen as the way to remember Jesus? What was the significance for those early Christians?
That's an insightful question. Remember, the Last Supper was a Passover meal. Bread and wine already held deep symbolic meaning in Jewish tradition. Bread represented sustenance, life itself. Wine symbolized joy and covenant.
So Jesus was building on existing symbolism, giving it new meaning within the context of his message and mission.
Exactly. By sharing these elements with his disciples, he was essentially saying, this is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for you. He was offering himself as the ultimate source of life and the foundation of a new covenant between God and humanity.
Wow, that's powerful. It transforms a simple meal into a profound act of self-giving and love.
And for those early Christians who had witnessed Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, this act would have been incredibly moving. It was a tangible way to connect with their risen Lord, to participate in his sacrifice, and to share in the hope of new life.
It's like they were experiencing a foretaste of the heavenly banquet, a reminder that even in the face of death, there's the promise of eternal life.
Precisely. Communion became a way to bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine, to connect with the mystery of Jesus' presence, even in his absence. This adds another layer to our understanding of why communion became such a central practice in Christianity. It wasn't just about remembering Jesus, it was about participating in his ongoing story, his ongoing presence in their lives.
And that's something that continues to resonate with Christians today. Communion in all its various forms offers a tangible way to encounter the mystery of faith, to connect with Jesus and with each other. So we've gone from a bustling, sometimes messy communal meal to a more formal symbolic ritual. What does this evolution of communion mean for us today?
Think about it. The way we practice communion today probably shapes how we understand Jesus and his message, wouldn't you say?
Now that you mention it, I think you're right. If we see communion as primarily a solemn, somber ritual, it might emphasize aspects of sacrifice, reverence, and awe, which are important, of course, but
But if we recall its roots as a communal meal, a celebration of life and connection, it could bring in themes of joy, shared purpose, even a bit of that early Christian rebelliousness against the norms of the time.
I like that it's like we're tapping into different facets of Jesus's message depending on how we approach communion. It's not either, it's both hand.
Exactly. How does the act of taking communion make you feel? What does it reveal about your relationship with your faith, with the community around you?
You know, it's funny, now that we've explored all this, I'm realizing that I've never really thought about it that deeply. I just sort of did it.
Well, I think that's true for a lot of people. We go through the motions, but maybe we don't always stop to consider the deeper meaning and the history behind them.
It's like we're so focused on the what that we forget about the why.
Exactly. And that's why I think these deep dives are so valuable. They give us a chance to step back and examine our beliefs and practices from a new perspective.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about. So for anyone listening, next time you take communion, whether it's in a grand cathedral or a simple gathering, think about what we've discussed today.
Yeah, think about those early Christians gathering in homes, sharing meals and stories, remembering Jesus.
That bread, that wine, they hold centuries of meaning, of evolution, of how people have connected with Jesus.
Don't just consume the elements, consume the ideas. Feel the weight of history, the joy of community, and above all, let it spark your own personal reflection on what Jesus' message means to you.
Beautifully put. And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the origins of communion. It's been a fascinating journey, full of surprising twists and turns. Who knew that something as seemingly simple as sharing bread and wine could have such a rich and complex history?
It's amazing what we can uncover when we really dive deep into a topic, isn't it? It reminds us that there's always more to learn and explore, even in traditions and practices we think we know well.
Absolutely. And that, my friend, is what the deep dive is all about. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the things that fascinate you.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people, you know?
Yeah.
We go through the motions, but maybe we don't always stop and consider, like,
Right.
the deeper meaning and the history behind them.
It's like we're so focused on the what that we forget about the why.
Exactly. And that's why I think these deep dives are so valuable. They give us a chance to step back and examine our beliefs and practices from a new perspective.
It's definitely giving me a lot to think about. So for anyone listening, next time you take communion, you know, whether it's in a grand cathedral or just a simple gathering,
Right.
think about what we've discussed today.
Yeah, think about those early Christians gathering in homes, sharing meals and stories, remembering Jesus.
That bread, that wine, they hold centuries of meaning, of evolution of how people have connected with Jesus.
Don't just consume the elements, consume the ideas. Feel the weight of history, the joy of community, and above all, let it spark your own personal reflection on what Jesus' message means to you.
Beautifully put. And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the origins of communion. It's been a fascinating journey, full of surprising twists and turns. Who knew that something as seemingly simple as sharing bread and wine could have such a rich and complex history?
It's amazing what we can uncover when we really dive deep into a topic. It reminds us that there's always more to learn and explore, even in traditions and practices we think we know well.
Absolutely. And that, my friend, is what the deep dive is all about. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the things that fascinate you.